Cambrian explosion initiates a series of macroevolutionary trends to discover not only how to make a living on the seafloor, but also above it and below it. There's a strong repeating pattern of evolution of benthic animals to reach ever higher above the seafloor and eventually to let go of the bottom and enter the plankton. The opposite is also true, with the evolution of increasingly deep burrowing, not just to escape predation, but also to exploit sediment resources and prey on animals hiding in the mud. A survey of planktonic taxa suggests that nearly all of them, except possibly the radiolarians, start from benthic ancestors. For example, fish start as near-bottom deposit-feeding jawless fish that scooped up mud and the animals that were in it to feed, or use gills to filter suspended food out of seawater. For example, modern branchiostoma, also known in older parlance as Amphioxus, is a tiny little fish-like animal that burrows tail first into the mud, leaving its head sticking out to filter feed in the bottom water. I have dug these up in Baja California sand flats. They're lovely things, a couple of inches long, with iridescent sides that are visible for just an instant before they wriggle back into the sediment tail first. Only later do the fish develop into species that swim above the sea bottom, and then eventually become fully pelagic. Another group of invaders of the open ocean from the seafloor are the Graptolites. These are colonial hemichordates that form an organic walled colony with diverse morphologies, like little bushes on the seafloor. Later they become free-floating, probably suspended partly by the swimming action of the zooids that make up the colony. Graptolites must have been widespread in open ocean waters, since we find them in Ordovician black shales, or graptolitic shales, deposited in deep water basins. The repeated evolution of groups into the plankton suggests there is an underlying driver to this macroevolutionary trend. There are likely several drivers for animals to invade the water column from the seafloor. First, there's competition for space on the bottom. Animals that have remained there often have all sorts of elaborate strategies to fight for space on the bottom. Reef inhabitants, for instance, have learned how to overgrow competitors, fight with specialized structures when they encounter another bottom-encrusting creature, or grow so fast that they quickly occupy space when the original owner dies. Second, there's lots of space in the plankton, meaning that the warfare on the bottom is not needed to corral resources in the water column. The food is just there for the taking. Third, there is abundant food in the plankton. A lot of it is microscopic, but the ocean, particularly in coastal waters, is well fed by upwelled nutrients and resources washed in from land. There is no shortage of food. These advantages do not imply some choice to become planktonic, of course. Rather, planktonic forms may have survived better than benthic taxa, creating a bias towards planktonic life. Plankton evolved by speeding up maturation and reproducing as larvae in the plankton. Another strategy is to omit settlement altogether and become adults in the plankton. Still, another approach is to become nectonic, namely developing active swimming in the water column. Now, not everybody does the complete move from the seafloor into the plankton. Instead, another solution to the competition for space on the seafloor is to grow tall, like a tree above the seabed. If you are a crinoid, for instance, your actual footprint on the bottom is small, since most of your body is maybe a meter or more off the seafloor. Hence, a crinoid can have access to resources that cannot be reached by a suspension feeder on or near the seabed. As a result, is that all those seafloor communities show epifaunal tiering. Like a forest, some animals are directly on the ground, some fill in the shrub habitat, some resemble mid-story trees, and some are like the giants of the forest. This forest-like ecology develops early, with fronds like Rangia in the Ediacaran assemblage reaching 30 centimeters or so above the seabed, although most Ediacaran animals were on the bottom or even hanging out underneath microbial mats. In the Cambrian, most organisms reach 10 or 20 centimeters above the seafloor, a height that quickly increases to a meter or more by the late Ordovician or Silurian with the crinoids. Reefs increase this height a lot as well. Even if the animals are individually not that big, their combined efforts make reef structures that are tens of meters in height. Now, of course, Another way to avoid competition on the seafloor is to burrow beneath it. This strategy produces infaunal tearing, where the issue is how deep an animal can burrow. The goals are similar to the other forms of tearing, namely predator avoidance, avoidance of competition for space, and having access to new resources. As an example of the latter, some infaunal animals live on bacteria that they farm in their burrows or even in their own bodies. These chemosynthetic farmers use the oxic-anoxic boundary in their burrows to feed bacteria toxic stuff like hydrogen sulfide or dissolved iron, while the farmer still has access to the aerobic respiration to keep their own bodies going. There are many examples of this strategy, but one is the approach of callian acid shrimp that dig burrows into anoxic sediments rich in dissolved iron and hydrogen sulfide. The shrimp pumps fresh oxygen-laden water through the burrow system to keep its own respiration working, and then it packs the walls of its burrow with pellets of its own poop. The poop pellets are sitting right at the oxic-anoxic boundary in the burrow wall, and so are massive bacterial production factories, utilizing resources that exist abundantly right there at the reox boundary. The shrimp eats the poop laden with bacteria to complete the circle. Ha! What a brilliant strategy! Burrows reach depths of 10 or 20 centimeters in the Cambrian, and that increases to about a meter or so by the late Paleozoic, that is the Carboniferous, and then stay like that pretty much up to the present. We see the converse in these depths in the heights that animals reach above the seafloor in reef systems, where very large structures festooned with high-tiering animals like corals, sponges, and sea fans make a living. But on soft bottoms, where the sediment is mobile, the epifaunal tiering of suspension-feeding animals is curtailed in the Mesozoic, 10, maybe 100, 200 million years ago. Charlie Thayer came up with the concept of biological bulldozers, which I love, to explain why high suspension-feeding animals failed to grow as high in the Mesozoic as they had in the Paleozoic. In his theory, increased disturbance of soft-bottom environments by burrowers is the cause. Those biological bulldozers. Something similar occurs due to modern trawling fisheries that churn the sediment so frequently that long-lived big suspension feeders cannot get established on the seafloor today. Indeed, today the top tier is now restricted largely to hard-bottom environments like reefs and rocky outcrops, and even these are under pressure from human trawling and climate change. So we see that there are several large-scale trends in marine evolution. There is the pressure to avoid the hyper-competition for space on the sea floor by becoming a planktonic animal or a free-swimming one. There are also pressures to escape the predation right on the seabed by practicing business a meter or more off the bottom as a high-tiering suspension feeder. And there's another solution as well, namely burrowing into the sediment to mine all that buried organic matter, find protection, become a chemosymbiotic farmer, or hunt down your prey in the muck. There are lots of ways to make a living, and life has discovered most of these strategies pretty early in animal evolution.